Can you be middle class and on the breadline? There's a growing feeling that the pandemic is causing those that once had plenty to now have to ask for help. They're calling them Europe's new poor. Lost jobs, lack of food, nowhere to live any longer. For all of these reasons and many more, aid agencies are having to help those that once easily looked after themselves. This is Roundtable. Welcome to the programme. I'm David Foster. Today, why the United Nations had to help feed UK children, how food banks are overwhelmed, and whether this new underclass is here to stay. The COVID-19 pandemic means that millions are struggling in Europe, with countries like the UK and Italy returning to lockdown already this year. Many across the continent are unable to find work, and charities and social services have stepped in to help. For the first time in its history, the United Nations Children's Fund launched an emergency response to help feed children in the UK. Oxfam believes that COVID-19 could raise the number of people in poverty in Spain by 1.1 million. An increasing number of people are relying on food banks in Belgium, with the European Food Banks Federation noting a 54% increase in food demand between March and June 2020 compared to the same period in 2019. Will poverty in Europe continue to grow? Well, we can head to Belgium now and welcome to this roundtable Jacques Vandenschrik, President of the European Federation of Food Banks. We go to the UK. Stephanie Slater is with us from there. She's Chief Executive of School Food Matters. That is the organisation that just got £25,000 from UNICEF, giving thousands of breakfast boxes to children and families over the Christmas holidays. And then we go to Rome, Italy. Michele Raitano, who is from the Sapienza University of Rome and has studied this phenomenon, if you like, Michele. Is it something that the headline writers have invented because it's an easy way of putting so many people into one box, or does this new underclass, if you like, really exist?
The problem now is that the problem is what is happening now and what will happen in the future, because we have a lot of risk that has emerged since the beginning of the pandemic, since the 2020, has concerned the new people at risk, because this is a risk that is first of all created in the labor market, because individuals, this is a very strange type of crisis, because this is not a normal crisis, because of there is less demand, less production in the economic system, and so some individuals lose their job. But some individuals lose their job because they mandatorily cannot work because of national regulation. So this is clearly a crisis that is created in the labor market because of the social distance measures and so on. But anyway, from that point of view, the capacity of deal with an increase of new working poor individuals depend on the one hand of the seriousness of the pandemic, on the other hand of the type of measures that have been implemented, both as concerns social distances, but also as concerns the welfare measures that have been implemented in the various countries. And then differences depend on that. What is the crucial challenge for the future is how the economy will recover, when there will be a recovery, and what type of recovery we will have, because the poverty might become a new temporary poverty, or they will become new persistent poor according to how the economic system will change over time. And this is a big challenge that maybe we can also discuss during this roundtable.
Yeah, well, we will. We'll come to that, Michele, if in a little while in this program. And Stephanie, I'm going to ask you in a short while about what specifically happened in Southwark, that is in London, with this donation from UNICEF. But Jacques, let me come to you first of all. I note in a report you prepared earlier this year, you said this was a wake-up call to food banks generally.
Yes, an event like it was, first of all, it was a sudden, all of a sudden in February, March 2020, we were all faced, most of us faced with an increased demand in food as a result of people going out of job or being temporarily affected by unemployment. And this new poor situation has created an increased demand of job on the one hand. On the other hand, I don't know if you remember the sort of a panic buying that happened in the beginning of the crisis, that also had an impact on our supply chain. Vice versa.
And who do you notice? I'm sorry, I thought you'd finished for a moment. Let me continue. Who are these people? Do they cover all spectrum of society?
Well, the people who are requesting food aid are people who are in food insecurity. And you will probably find that most of those people are those who were already on the verge of poverty before the crisis. And with the advent of the crisis, of the pandemic, they have maybe put onto a social security system some sort of a replacement income, but that is never the same thing as the salary, and they actually fell into poverty. There is a number of cases of people who didn't call for food aid before the crisis, but due, for example, to the closure of schools, the kids could no longer benefit from a school meal, and then the parents had to ask for food aid. This is an example, but the same thing happens with old people. The availability of food has not always been optimal, and so they may, because of the circumstances, require food aid.
Stephanie, Southwark is the borough of London that many people would recognise by identifying it with the Shard, tallest building in the UK capital. Now, you had to give out more than £25,000 worth of free breakfast boxes.
So this follows a programme we ran from March during school closures all the way through the summer holidays. To give you a bit of background, School Food Matters is a small charity, and in happier times, we run food education programmes for children and organise interventions around children's health and obesity. We were primed, ready to start a 5-year programme when schools closed, so we had to pivot very quickly to respond to this growing need for support for food in that community. Southwark is a low-income area. It has a very high rate of children who are entitled to free school meals. And with school closures, it meant they had not only access to their free school meal, but a lot of these schools run breakfast clubs too, because these children need support to get them fit and ready to learn in the morning. So we were able to fill that gap. Now, when we started it, we distributed 500 boxes. So that's 5,000 breakfasts. By week 5, we were delivering 5,000 boxes. And by the end of the summer, which was an 18-week program, we delivered 500,000 breakfasts. And because of this, when the Christmas holidays came, UNICEF had invested £700,000 in the UK to support community projects such as ours. And we were primed and ready to go. And it's very important to just, reflect what your other speakers have said. Many of these families have never claimed any benefit in their life before, but they're on precarious incomes, gig economy, 0-hour contracts. They've never been to a food bank before. But the pandemic has just compounded this issue around food insecurity. YouGov poll before the pandemic revealed that 2.4 children were living in food insecure households. That was before the pandemic. And with a massive spike in food bank use, we knew that we had to respond to this crisis.
Okay, well, I tell you what, Stephanie, at this point, let's hear from 3 people in particular who would like to give their thoughts on why they've been using food banks in the UK.
I was working part-time as a cleaner for evenings, and then when COVID started, we had to quit because everything was closed. And our offices, they're not opening till 2021 because people can work from home who were working in the office, and me, they don't need me now.
I was a security guard. Life was fine. But then as soon as it hits, just lost my job, and because it had to close down because it's just the way rules are and policies from government. And that's the end of it. I'm just waiting to get by.
It's a nice opportunity to let people know that these places are not just alcoholics and drug addicts. As they say, there for the grace of God go I. We've all worked at one time or another. You lose your job, can't pay your rent, people don't care, and then where do you end up?
Okay, so three very different views there, but I'm wondering if this is new because 2018 and 33.4 million Europeans were unable to afford a meal with meat, fish, or vegetarian equivalent every day. That's from Eurostat. 2019, 92.4 million people in the EU at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Is this simply down to the pandemic?
No, as I said, before the pandemic started, the YouGov poll showed that 2.4 million children in the UK were living in food insecure households. So that was the existing stat. Imagine what it is now. And what we also know in the UK, you will know that there is a measure of disadvantage amongst school children called free school meals. The eligibility criteria to get a free school meal is set way too low. And we know this because we surveyed the families we were supporting across 18 weeks, and 1 in 5 of the children weren't eligible. So that means they're not on the government's radar as disadvantaged. So we know the criteria is not set at the right level. So I'm sure all of you will have heard of Marcus Rashford, the English football player who has got behind the campaign to extend eligibility so that we can sweep up some of these families that are missing out so that no child goes hungry.
Okay, Jacques, let me ask you about another thing you said in your statement. You said this crisis has identified the strengths and the weaknesses of food banks. What did you mean by that?
Well, the strength is obviously the program, the philosophy of food banking, and I want to stress that when I talk food banks, I talk about these large logistic centers that actually supply the local charities. I'm not talking about the local charities. Most of the food banks in Europe do not have an interface with the final beneficiaries. They have an interface with the charities. It's only in Holland and in Germany where they incorporate actually the interface with the beneficiaries. This being clear or said, the strength is obviously the capacity to salvage food from the bin, salvage food from food waste in order to have to use these surpluses, the food surplus, for a socially responsible program.
And you say that businesses and supermarkets have been particularly generous.
Yeah, they normally are, but obviously at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a bit hectic. The weakness is that to actually operate this, you need funds because you need trucks, you need cold rooms, you need big refrigerators, you need deep freezing capacity in large volumes and things like that. So you need this, and most of the food banks actually rely only on public funding and public charity. So especially in the countries, I cannot speak for one country only, but especially I would say in the countries in the Eastern Europe, there is a big need to cover infrastructure and logistic costs.
Let's hone in, if we can, Michele, on Italy, where you are. You're at Rome. There's a group called Nonna Roma, which I think means Grandma Rome. It helps with giving out food and helping people in desperate need. This is from Alberto Campagna, who's from the group. He says they are the new poor, among them domestic workers who lost their jobs, people who were doing precarious work, young professionals who have a drastically reduced income, a serious risk of many people not being able to keep up rental payments and losing their homes. And I put this in the context of before the pandemic, they were helping 300 families. Now they say it's 7,500. So in Italy as a whole, what is being done to handle this problem?
Yes, this was already a huge problem before the pandemic, but this is based on a clear fragility of the Italian system, of labor market system and Italian welfare system before the pandemic. That has been has become dramatic after the pandemic, because the problem is that, as also the previous speaker said, we had a development strategy in the last years that was based on precarious work, on very low paid jobs, and also with a very, very frequent informal jobs. The problem was with the pandemic, those individuals cannot work anymore, or anyway, if they continue to work, they reduced a lot their earnings. They had no savings at all. Because the problem is that because of very low wages, these workers had not the capacity to save money. And if you have not the capacity to save money and your income drops to zero, you have neither money for satisfying your basic needs. And the first basic needs is the house and the food. And these two problems are clearly dramatic. From a certain point of view, the government was able to intervene to protect standard workers, to protect employees, to protect their standard categories of self-employed. But the problem was for the very large number of informal workers. It has been estimated that more or less 3 million individuals work through informal contracts in Italy, and it means that they cannot be covered by measures to protect workers. Then you need to protect poor on the whole, but we have an historical delay with measures towards the poor. Then we have, as the case of Nonna Roma, Grandma Roma, as Alberto Campailla said, we have the capacity made by some charities, by ONGs, to make some intervention, but it depends on the areas. It is very heterogeneous over the territory.
And let me ask you this, if I may. Are more and more people falling through the cracks, not being helped?
And a lot of people is not helped. Mostly, the problem is that you have it depends on the territory. For instance, it is easier to help individuals who live in large area with a lot of individuals who are poor. It is much more complex to help individuals who live in the periphery of a city, but also there is a problem of stigma in many cases, because it might become easier to protect households that in a sense are already linked with anti-poverty measures. The problem is that how you can help individuals who are working.
Stephanie, what has surprised you about what you've seen during the course of the last 12 months in your work?
I have been absolutely surprised by that figure of 1 in 5 children not being eligible for free school meals. So it shows that the system is flawed and children are falling through the gap. I've been struck by some new cohorts of vulnerable people that I would never have imagined. I had a call from a school yesterday saying they urgently needed support for families in their schools where mothers have left their houses because of domestic abuse, and now they have no access to food or savings. So obviously we know the mental health issue around lockdown is going to be down the line. I also have discovered that there are a whole stack of international students, both in London and I'm sure in the other European capitals too, who have come to the UK to study and have got stuck here and have no recourse to public funds. So they're having to go to food banks to collect food to keep themselves well. And of course, food banks have to respond to these great new groups of people coming to them for the first time. So every day I have a surprise on who is being impacted by this pandemic, and we know that it came up right on top of a, if you like, quite a fragile food resilience system here.
So let's hear from Jacques, because I'm going to put you on the spot. I noticed in the notes I was given by my producer that you said you were optimistic about the future. Stephanie and Michele, you can come back on this one. You don't need me to ask a question, but let's hear your reasons to be cheerful, Jacques.
Well, there are many. There are reasons that are more societal reasons. There are also, I think, systemic reasons. Let's start with the societal reasons. What we have witnessed, and I fully agree with Stephanie, that domestic abuse is part of the scene, and mental health issues are also important. But on the other hand, there has been so many shows of solidarity. It looks like the pandemic has made us understood that there are also people around us who need attention. And I think these are values that are very close to our heart in terms of food bankers. And we have seen so many initiatives, so many inventivity, so much in creativity to actually meet the demand and meet the needs of the people who are in a precarious situation, and very often for the first time in their life.
Michele, let me ask you this one. Listening to what Jacques has to say there, would that be any comfort to somebody in dire straits, in a terrible situation, if they couldn't get food for their children, if they had nowhere to live, no prospect of work? But the fact that people are being kind, would that make much difference?
The problem, from a certain point of view, we can argue that the pandemic might improve the condition, but might be, on the one hand, an experience, a positive experience to create more solidarity, more social cohesion. On the other hand, we might become more optimistic about the future with respect to the clear evidence that the previous way of reasoning, way of making policies, labor market stance was unacceptable, have to be changed. And then it might become a good experience to change the economic environment, to change the labor market conditions for a lot of individuals, to have much more attention on what happens on the households. For instance, as concerned in Italy, we have a problem of school canteens. School canteens are not guaranteed. So poorer individuals cannot receive in many cases because there is not long hour at school. Poverty is a multidimensional issue, and maybe it becomes clear that we should look at the whole multidimensionality. The other problem, anyway, is that
I'm going to have to stop you. We're sort of running out of time, and I want to get back to everybody else. Does that make you smile, what Jacques had to say, Stephanie?
Absolutely. I'm so pleased that Jacques has highlighted the public response to this. We have been absolutely overwhelmed by showing us support for the work that we've been doing just in 1 or 2 London boroughs. It also shows the power of local action, community action. Long before government got their mechanism for supporting schools together, schools were just getting on with it. They had rallied support from parents, from community groups, from local corporates to make sure that no child went hungry. And every day I come to work, I'm just thrilled to be part of this, because I'm so excited to be part of this amazing movement. But one more thing I need to say. One of the important things that happened during this pandemic, it has shone a great big light on the problem of food insecurity that was, for some part, a hidden problem. And I think if we can continue to tell our stories, it's going to help change policy, which is the way out of this.
And Jacques, I know you've said that you believe the economic situation will get better and therefore people's lives will get better. But what about before that? How many people are going to be left behind?
Well, I think from the report, I mean, we are surveying our membership, and we have 24 countries in full members of our federation. And we surveyed the membership, and it would appear that at present, we have a 30% increase in demand if you compare the situation at the end of September as opposed to January. Most of this demand has been met, actually, but the situation may vary from country to country. The economic situation is obviously of big concern to everyone, and the food system, how the food is managed. I mean, I want to just say one thing: we are today producing enough food in the world to feed 12 billion people. We are only 8, and 3 billion are ill-fed and 1 billion is hungry. This is a paradox that we have to get the people together and think through. I mean, food banks is...
And quickly, on a practical level, Jacques, if somebody listens to your message and thinks, therefore, how can I help? What should they do? It's got to be brief, I'm afraid.
No, we need to find new ways to handle the food systems, and I think food banks are there to disappear in an ideal world. We are not the solution. We are just a part of the solution, and hopefully for a temporary moment. Unfortunately, the present situation, I think, make us believe that we are still there for a long time.
Okay. That's a somber note on which to end, but I would like to thank each one of you. Jacques, Stephanie, and Michele, great to have you on this edition of Roundtable, and wherever you happen to be watching this program, my thanks, and we hope to have your company next time. Until then, from me, David Foster, and the team, goodbye.